Welcome to Pay Attention, interviews about truth in troubling times. And today my guest is Diana Johnstone. Diana Johnstone, PhD, was press secretary for the Green Group in the European Parliament from 1989 to 1996. In her latest book, Circle in the Darkness, Memoirs of a World Watcher, she recounts key episodes in the transformation of the German Green Party from a peace party to a war party. Her other books include Fool's Crusade, Yugoslavia, NATO, and Western Delusions, and in co-authorship with her father, Paul H. Johnstone, From MAD, or The Madness of Mutual Destruction, to Madness Itself, Inside Pentagon Nuclear War Planning. Diana's work has been extremely inspiring for me. I find her perspective both invigorating, informative, but also in many ways frightening because she tells the truth. So she can be reached at her diana.johnstone@wanadoo.fr. She's in France, she's in Paris right now, and that's where she's speaking to me from. So welcome, Diana. I'm very happy to have you back.
And thank you very much, Paula, for inviting me.
It's, this is a very dire and frightening time right now. And in a way, you and I have spoken at times when there were various kinds of threats, but none that seemed as urgent, I think, as what's going on right now in the Ukraine and with Russia and NATO and so on. So I'd like to start by saying that we're going to be speaking especially from your essay that appeared on March 16th in Consortium News, and it's called For Washington, War Never Ends. And I realized that since it came out on the 16th, there have been some changes and some important changes. And I would like to speak with you first about your thoughts about Busha. I think that's the pronunciation. I'm not sure. The town where supposedly corpses have been found of civilians.
I don't think anything has changed. It's just gotten worse. I think the horrible thing that's happening is that the hatred is being deepened and intensified. And what is I find, just deeply disturbing is that thanks largely to arrogant United States hegemonic policies,
yes,
we are turning the world into a world of hatred, of lies and hatred. And especially living in Europe, Europe is being destroyed by this, I think, psychologically and probably economically as well, by this hatred that the United States has actually insisted on creating in order to keep Europe divided. I mean, it's this very simple logic. As long as the Western Europeans and the Russians hate each other, then the United States rules. That was theorized by Zbigniew Brzezinski and others. And it's very obvious to anyone who's paying attention. I mean, it's blatantly obvious what's happening, and most people don't see it. And this is deeply disturbing because I'm seeing something that to me is just, how can you miss it? And yet most people don't see it. And they don't see that Russia has been dragged into this because the United States wanted this war, just as it wanted to drag Russia or the Soviet Union, Russia into Afghanistan many years ago.
yes,
Precisely in order to weaken and in fact destroy the country. This is diabolical.
yes.
I mean, really to spend all the energy of the United States and the power in order to create lasting, deep hatred between countries is it's diabolical.
Well, it's really unthinkable in many ways what is happening. And I agree with everything you're saying. I do see it. I also wonder how people cannot see it, because since 2014, what's been happening in the Ukraine is reported by alternative news like Consortium News. I followed it there. I understood what was happening. I understood how the US was setting it up, their own government, essentially, in the Ukraine. I wasn't sure how things were going to proceed, but I figured that there would be this kind of collision. The way it's happened has happened a little bit more, it seems to me, a little bit faster and a little bit more transparently than I would have thought. But still, people can't seem to see it. So I wondered if we could go back in your article just to go over a few points that you've made, because again, I find people are not, people, by people, I mean North American people, the people that are around me. And, I'm in Vermont. I'm around a lot of very educated people. I see a lot of educated people in therapy. And unfortunately, they don't seem to understand what the US has been doing in Europe and in relation to Russia and the Soviet Union. It's as though really educated people can't see beyond the blinders of the mainstream media, especially the New York Times. And so I'd like to go back and just talk about World War II, just momentarily, the way you say there were two World War IIs. There was the Russian World War II and the US World War II, leaving our countries in very different paradigms, stories, narratives. Can you just review that briefly?
Well, yeah, briefly, and here I'm talking about the European World War II. I leave Asia out of this, but this is the European War. The European War, of course, was marked especially by an absolutely savage invasion by the Nazi army. Wehrmacht is a huge German war machine of the Soviet Union, which caused enormous devastation and suffering to the people of the Soviet Union. An example of that was the last nearly 3 years, I think, the siege of Leningrad, where Putin's parents, he wasn't born yet, he was born in 52, but his parents suffered that and lost a child. There were 1 million people died there. It was horrible. I mean, there was tremendous suffering that undergone by the Russian people and this other peoples of the Soviet Union. And yet they pulled themselves together and practically miraculously finally stalled and defeated the Nazi war machine. And you see, the Soviet Union both suffered from World War II and won World War II, as far as the European. The United States arrives a little bit later. It comes in the Normandy invasion when the Russians are already defeating the Germans. They have trouble with their invasion, but it's nothing compared to what the Russians have been through. The war did not touch the continental United States. The people of the United States did not have their houses bombed and their people shot and all of that. The Russians went through that, the Americans didn't. And then the United States comes out and announces itself as the victor, as we won this war. And of course, they did win it because they were richer than everybody. The other European countries had destroyed each other and were in ruins, especially the Soviet Union was just concerned in trying to have peace and reconstruct. And here was the United States suddenly richer than the whole world. War was very profitable to the United States. It became the world dominant power, and the leaders decided, well, this is great, and we'll just keep on this way.
Right.
And so for them, war was wonderful because it made the United States the dominant power. And that's why then they did not disarm when they could have. They decided, there's another threat. And that's an excuse to build up the military-industrial complex, which has taken over the country like an octopus ever since, and became this military power. And for them, war is great, and you keep it going. And as long as you keep it going, the United States profits.
Well, it seems that because of the bomb, because of the ways in which the US developed after the war, we developed towards this kind of philosophy of mutually assured destruction. And it is a madness, but it is the acronym MAD. And that is supposed to create some kind of balance of power that leads to something that would be, it's even hard to imagine that anyone thinks this is rational. I mean, it's a kind of a delusional Dr. Strangelove kind of state of mind that it seems the US hegemony has been operating under. And I agree with you, it's been profitable. Also, in your essay, you mentioned that Hollywood depicts World War II from the American point of view as though the Americans were the victors, and that when we arrived, everything got a lot better. And then, as you mentioned, there is something about the idea that America is the final force for good in the world, as well as you say, is a fun place to live. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that ideology, that has come out of World War II, that is part of Hollywood movies, that still gets promoted, I think, in this Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, I think you see the US entertainment industry wins all the wars because it retells the history. And most Americans don't learn any history in school to speak of. I mean, no world history. I think Americans are not trained in history from my experience. Of course, there are always exceptions in a big country, but basically Americans are extraordinarily ignorant about the rest of the world, and they get their history from Hollywood movies, and their Hollywood movies portray this Manichaean world where there's the good Americans who are having fun, and then they have to stop having fun to go kill the bad guy who's trying to do something horrible, and this sort of these little fairy tales, these little Grimm's fairy tales of a bad person comes along and he wants to rule the world, and he's going to kill everybody, and then Americans come in and save. This infantile fairy story of the good and the bad is told and retold and retold and retold in American cinema and bomb buster movies and all of this stuff. And I think it poisons people's minds that the world is like that. And you can always tell who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And of course, you've got to be on the side of the good guy and sure. And I mean, this infantile, absolutely non-moral thinking. I mean, this is it's the opposite of any real morality. There's no consideration, there's no empathy, there's no understanding for others, there's no analysis of what's really going on. There's just, let's take the side of the good guy against the bad guy. And this is what the United States is imposing on Europe with this campaign against Russia.
Well, the thing is, for whatever reason, Hitler was the archetypal bad guy. For many, many reasons, one could look at the conditions, the setup, the individual, the whole thing. It happened to be the case that when I was growing up, it was once upon a time there was a really bad guy, and we defeated him. So that story seems to be the
Absolutely.
story that got translated, and
Exactly.
then it's as though that's the story again and again. And the implication is, oh, this is another Hitler. This is another authoritarian personality. This is another guy that we have to take out. And of course, we're getting the same story about Putin right now. And I mean, it's so blatantly off, though, because if you listen to Putin's speeches or you understand what he's been trying to do with Russia, this is just a distortion. And in your article, of course, you included the full video of Putin's 2007 address to the Munich Security Conference. And I listened to that address. I had listened to him previously, but I had never heard him be so intelligent and so essentially thoughtful about how he was appealing to Europe and to NATO to allow this now more complex world. Well, Russia would join in a responsible way and be responded to in terms of fairness and responsibility. And so, could you talk a little bit about the way you see Putin and then what happened after that 2007 Munich conference?
Well, for the subsequent 15 years, he's still been trying to explain this. I mean, it's just astonishing. He's been trying over and over again to explain how he feels as a Russian leader, and he has just had nothing but insults, slaps in the face, so to speak. I mean, I mentioned my article. They have celebrations of the end of World War II, and they leave out the Russians. Like they had nothing to do with it. Mom, what are they complaining about? I mean, just because we're arming NATO and surrounding them with deadly forces and war games all the time in the Black Sea, right next to them, in the north, in the pole, in the Baltic states, and there were more and more NATO war games aimed at how we would fight Russia. And they're supposed to say, "Oh well, we don't mind this. It's okay." Because it is those things are going on all the time and are not reported in the media, or not big reported. They'll be reported in the Stars and Stripes.
Right. Alternative media.
It's not that they're secret. It's just that the public is not kept aware of the fact that there's this constant gestures of hostility, verbal and physical, with arms builds up against Russia, surrounding it, advancing NATO, which had been understood that they would not do. The hostility toward Russia has been overwhelming, and Putin tries to explain this. And what do? They shut down Russian media. You mustn't hear that. That's fake news. What the other side says is fake news. Just hear our side. Just hear the Western side. The Western side is, and so this is you block out when you can't hear the other person. You're saying the other person doesn't exist. The other person has no right to exist. You have no right to hear what the other exists. You just, if you hear what the other says, and then you're a supporter of the evil, etc. And yes. I mean, it's incredible, and it, of course, now it's reached a terrible level of actual beginning of what could be the first steps of the final war.
Right.
I don't predict anything. Because I didn't expect, like you, I really didn't expect this to happen. I had seen Putin being patient for 15 years. I thought he'll be patient forever, but apparently that didn't happen because he really felt that it was building up against Russia too much so. And I can see
Yes.
why that is. But I expected that.
Could I ask you one thing about the way you understand the Biden administration? You know, because there has been all of this, let's say, since 2014, clear implications of Biden and his son's involvement in this changing of the government in Ukraine. I mean, do you have a sense that there has been some sort of, I don't know, conjecture or thought process about a step-by-step kind of development there? Because what we've been doing recently, um, in terms of NATO and so on, I feel is, you know, like wanting to bring the Ukraine into NATO and bringing more and more countries into NATO. And, you know, if people don't know the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was really founded to try to bring some stability for countries that didn't have the kinds of armaments and power that the US has. But now it's developed into an entirely different thing. As you said, it's become an aggressive force for its own purposes. But I wonder if there was some timely way in which the Biden administration was developing this. You know, I don't know. What has happened recently seemed to me to be a kind of a gambit in a chess game, but it went badly. I felt like there was something they didn't, that the US didn't see that that could happen with Russia and China if they worked together, or, you know, Russia, China, India, and Brazil in the original BRIC group. Just your thoughts about the Biden administration and what has happened recently.
Well, I think Biden personally has been a war hawk throughout his career. I mean, you can't put this down to individuals. And this is important. Just a little thing I was thinking. You see, the U.S. is always talking about the enemy as an autocracy. It's Hitler. It's a one-man rule. Actually, the U.S. doesn't like strong governments because they might resist the U.S. So every government where there's a leader that seems to be concerned about his country becomes an autocrat. And we aren't, because we change presidents every 4 years. And in fact, it doesn't much matter who the president is, because there's a whole oligarchy financial that's running the country, and then the presidents come and go, and they're there to sell the policy and then move on to some other mediocre politician. And so we're a democracy because we don't have strong leaders. We just have a terribly strong oligarchy, money class that's running everything. And it doesn't much matter who you vote for, because the policy goes right ahead. But Biden happens to be particularly belligerent. I mean, he made horrible remarks about the Serbs should be, you know, they're bad people, etc. And he loves wars all the time. So he's just right as a salesperson for this. But he's nothing much. I mean, in fact, he almost deliberately put up a kind of an old man who looks weak. So that makes us look innocent, because in fact, we don't have a strong leader. We have a weak leader. We have weak leaders. So it must be better. Actually, these weak leaders will never look out for the well-being of the people. They're working for the donors.
Yes, that's right. They're working for the stock market or whatever, for their, you know, their stakeholders. You know, this thing about autocracy also, and autocrats. I've just noticed this language coming out recently. Middlebury College got a grant for transforming conflict, but the way that grant was talked about in the news was that autocracy is on the rise. in a, and I was thinking, what do you mean autocracy is on the rise, or authoritarianism is on the rise? This is not, this is a language now that's
Yes,
that's
exactly.
coming out, that's being used, I think, to promote this potential fight against Russia. I mean, I see it just recently, even that
Exactly.
public domain is being manipulated again.
Yeah, exactly. You see, for a long time, they was democracy versus freedom, rather, that's even more vague, versus communism. Now that isn't very credible anymore. So they've come up with autocracy. So that's the new Manichaean dualism. There's democracy, which I mean, Biden goes to Warsaw and he says, I mean, it's every generation has to defeat democracy's mortal foes. The battle for democracy could not conclude and did not conclude with the end of the Cold War. Now the forces of autocracy have revived. So we found another villain. So an autocracy is more vague than communism. You can say anything is autocracy, including the United States, because in fact, it's just who is running things really, you don't know. It's very vague in the United States because it's a sort of mushy oligarchy. You don't know exactly who's deciding this military industrial complex, et cetera, et cetera. It's not one man, it's not one person. So since it's vague, you can say that's democracy. And if you can identify the leader, that's autocracy. But that doesn't mean anything. What about the Vatican? I mean, that's pretty autocratic. Are we going to go bomb the Vatican because it's an autocracy? I mean, this is ridiculous, but we have to have, the United States has to function with this dualism of the good, which must fight forever against the bad. And so this generation of Europeans must go without heat, must end up in nuclear war, because its task, as Biden has told the Europeans, is now to fight autocracy.
Yes. Well, it was, there was recently this terrorism. So there was communism, then there was terrorism, and then for a while we were fighting a virus, but now we're fighting autocracy. So we're always in some sort of war where it's the US hegemony that is the good, and everything else we have to defeat. It would seem as though intelligent, educated people in the US would see through this, that it would become very transparent. And I guess it's the combination of social media, which, just all of the big social media outlets, they remove anything that is critical of the US. And then you've got the New York Times and the Washington Post that speak for the CIA and the FBI, basically. And it seems still that people read this assuming they're getting some kind of news. I mean, this is what, to me, is the most puzzling, because, just by all studies of anything you look at, the, sort of group or crowd psychology, or how people are sort of hypnotized by mass hysteria or whatever, you usually have about 20% of people who oppose whatever the collective view is. I don't feel that it is 20% in the US right now. I mean, it seems like it's 5%, if that, but I don't know why. I don't know, is it because universities are also sort of in the spin of this, that people are not being thoughtful in the ways that they might have, at earlier times when the Vietnam War was being opposed, or even in the early days after 9/11, there were at least questions about what the US was doing, or when we went to war with Iraq, there were questions about whether we really knew what we were doing. I mean, I felt like there was enough of a minority then to speak about the fact that George Bush seemed to be lying about weapons of mass destruction. But now there isn't this.
No, No. I find it very, 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 very alarming, and I think it's a bit different in France, by the way, because there's some polls that showed that like 30% of French, in fact, it was denounced by saying, what's wrong with the French? They have this conspiracy theory. 30% believe that NATO goaded the Russians into attacking Ukraine, which is true.
Yes, yes, yes.
But this is denounced as the French falling for because the mainstream. I mean, I think there's more division here. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of reasons for that. The United States, well, maybe because we're in Europe, and I mean the French would like to have some good relations with Russia,
Yes.
and the U.S. doesn't care. They in fact have said to Europeans, you must not use anything, mustn't trade with Russia, but they're trading with Russia.
Right.
They do it, but their European satellites must not do this, and it's. I don't know where this will end, but I don't know. I think also the rise of identity politics has also taught people to identify with my group against their group.
Right. Yes.
To see everything in terms of groups. I mean, of course, you're supposed to see them as good. I mean, the blacks are all good, and the immigrants are all good, and they all is good. But you have to see, and anybody who's against them is full of hate, and that. I mean, it creates a whole atmosphere of group against group again.
Yes. It's a polarization, and it's like a desirable polarization where there's always got to be the good and the bad, and we're on the side of the good and we're conquering the bad. And that seems to be the narrative. And with this sort of mutually assured destruction behind it, that things aren't going to go out of hand because we have the power. I remember when my grandson asked me about the bomb and how many bombs there were, and I was going into it. He was about 6 at the time. He said, "But we have more, don't we?"
Yeah.
And I said, well, yes, the US does have more, but the thinking is about a 6 to 7-year-old kind of thinking. And then you get more complex as you develop. You realize that having more of something isn't always better. That that's not the way the world works. But that it's heartening to know, at least in Europe, you feel that there is some sort of pushback on the
a little, but not nearly enough. I think there will be, because the outcome of this is going to start getting worse and worse and worse. But and also I speak about France. France has historically been rather friendly with Russia.
Yes.
The country, what worries me is all the countries that aren't friendly with Russia. Poland is never friendly with Russia. Right. Germany is a very uncomfortable thing that's coming back, because somewhere deep down with some part of the German population, I know Germany pretty well, and I've been rather horrified at the extent to which Germany has gone along. Of course, but I always remember Germany is a militarily occupied country ever since 1945. The United States has nuclear weapons and troops and tanks and everything. It is occupied. And believe me, that doesn't stop with the military. It goes to the psychological, to the influence of the media and everything. Germany is an occupied country. And the United States is sort of allying it in a sense of revenge against Russia. And this really horrifies me, because now they're arming, they want to redo World War II, but on the other side. They want to arm Japan against China and and Germany against Russia. Like, let's have World War II, only this time we're on the Axis power side. That'll be fun. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're pushing Germany into rearmament. Now, not everybody likes that, but there are some who do, and they happen to be in powerful positions right now. There can be this sort of getting even with the Russians.
So, do you think that the problems, the deprivations that would come through the energy problems in if European countries sanction in the way the US is promoting, and if they are cutting off from their sources with Russia, will those deprivations change people's minds? I mean, and Germany is one of the countries that stands to really be hurt a lot.
Yes, I don't know. And what gets me is that we think the Germans are so smart. I mean, they have this reputation. And yet the German leaders seem to be walking into this like they were sleepwalking. And now really? there are protests coming from major industries like the chemical industry saying, what's going to happen? We're not going to. And you'd have thought the leaders, I mean, they're not worried about the people, and they don't seem to be worried about their economy either. They just follow the Americans. It's incredible. I mean, the mediocrity of our political leaders is just, it's hard to grasp. And I don't know what, of course, what the US can do is hope that this trouble will push people maybe to want to make war against Russia so they can capture the gas or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what sort of insanity this can lead to, because it doesn't make any sense. There was a perfectly good economic relationship between Germany and there always has been. The Germans are very good at technology. The Russians have resources. The Russians have always had a lot of respect, by the way, for German know-how. I mean, the Russians respect the Germans. The Germans don't seem to respect the Russians. Russians are better at artistic things. So Russians are better at classical music and dancing and literature and science, but they're not very good business people. They're not. They don't have a knack for business. The Chinese have a knack for business. The Germans have a knack for business. There's a complementarity there between European peoples. They have these differences, can get along perfectly. The United States doesn't want them to get along. It wants to make the Russians be horrible so that it will perpetuate its control of Germany and the rest of the Western Europe. And that's exactly what's going on. And of course, the lies. I mean, obviously, naturally, there are going to be atrocity stories. One of the horrible things is that when you have a war, when the Russians go in there, they may be just go tiptoeing as nice as possible, but you know very well that once they're in there and they've been somewhere, it's going to be exactly what's happened. They'll come along and say, aha, there's been a massacre, there's been a genocide. That's the trap of being there, because that's part of the narrative now. Part of the narrative. And by the way, there's this Busha thing, just going back to it. The fact is, there's the evidence of that being the Russians. You should have this thing about this ABC. Never assume, never believe, always check the facts. And there's a 3-day gap between when the Russians left and these bodies were discovered. Right. And meanwhile, the Ukrainian police have gone in to purge collaborators. And there's no reason not to believe that the bodies found were the collaborators that had been purged by the Ukrainian forces. We don't know. And actually every bit as plausible as the idea that the Russians won away, leaving bodies all over the place.
Yes.
And in fact,
Yes.
it morphs with the facts. But you see, people aren't looking at the fact. Biden instantly says what he already said. Putin's a war criminal. He said that before. He said that before there was any war, he was saying that. So of
Right.
course he's saying that. And of course, Zelensky, they're going to create genocide because that's kind of the magic word that you throw
Oh,
out.
I know. I remember with Yugoslavia also. I mean, I remember this whole setup, and of course, it's been elsewhere too. In Iraq, there was also this idea. It seems like there are sort of playbook ideas, so to speak,
Exactly.
that are connected to, let's say, whatever the underlying deep state thing is. But part of what I worry about is that within the playbook ideas, there could be one attack on the US, that somehow happens. And then we're in a complete situation in which the US would have to dominate. And my worst case scenario is that just more or less what you said, that the US wants to control the resources that Russia has, and so wants to break things up or break things down. And the only way to do that is to make Russia look so bad, and perhaps to get beyond the boundaries of this Ukraine problem.
You see everywhere, and especially in countries as big as Russia, the whole new strategy of the United States for the last over 20 years since Yugoslavia is to back unhappy minorities
Yeah.
who want to rebel against the government.
Right.
And of course, Ukraine is perfect for that because Ukraine is deeply divided.
Yeah. Yeah.
To start with, it's deeply divided. It's not a united country. It's deeply divided. So there are these divisions to play on and to stimulate and push in the direction of hatred that they tend to go into. And so and then they'll find minorities in Russia. They find minorities everywhere that they can support in order to overthrow the government. That's the subversion is the main strategy of the
Well,
US.
and then having this
propaganda and subversion. What?
Having this vast social media, that works very well to support minorities in this subversive way, and the social media controls the narrative.
Yeah.
And so then people, are often, it seems, everywhere looking at their devices instead of at each other or even conversation. And so much of the narrative is controlled by the tech industry, which is controlled by the US.
Yeah.
And they're just little bits of it now breaking away through China. But I feel like this is a very critical moment. I know we're going to have to finish in a couple of minutes here. I wonder if there's anything at this moment that you would want to say that would leave people with some kind of idea about how to think, more clearly about what's happening, because I would like to talk with you again down the line, but is there anything that you want to add to the conversation that we've had? Because I think we've touched on the main concerns that are in your article and that also are on the rise around this sort of promotion of hatred and division.
There's always the very basis of human relations is empathy, is listening to other people, is hearing what other people have to say, is understanding something. And this has been for 15 years since the speech of Putin at Munich, there has been a concentrated campaign to prevent the West from hearing what he has to say, from understanding anything. while meanwhile having this aggressive push. So it always goes back to try to understand. In the Vietnam War, I took a group of American friends to go see the Vietnamese, talk to people. I was, human diplomacy. People should talk to other people. That I think that all the time. And what are we doing? France just threw out 50 diplomats, so there's less Russians to talk to. Why? Because of reports about Bushka, and nobody knows what happened there.
Right.
And so they're just shutting it down more. And when in fact it needs to be open up and talk to people and listen to people and realize that other people are human,
Yes. Well, I mean, most of my work right now is dedicated to real dialogue, which is keeping both sides humanized and being able to speak for yourself, but listen to others. And I would also encourage people to look at your article in the Consortium News and then to listen to Putin, because the speech that he gave in 2007 is so powerful when you hear his intelligence and his appeal to Europe to let's make this transition to a more civilized world in which we all share. And he talks about dialogue, and he talks about having both sides in, and then he gets completely dismissed, derided, ignored, and then attacked again and again, because it is very, very clear that there is a group of people, and they're backed by the US, but they're probably, elsewhere as well, who don't want dialogue, who want hegemony, who want essentially a kind of unipolar world with the US imperial government in charge of things. And, who knows where that's going to go. But at the moment, it's very, very dangerous not to understand, just to block off the understanding of what's going on. So I, I always like what you write and what you say. You were going to add something there.
Well, I'm just saying that refusing to understand is making yourself stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, the West is making itself stupid.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But that's been going on for quite a while. For quite a while, I mean, I think that the beginning of it was the social media movements here, where people are no longer thinking. And perhaps when Google took all of the libraries and put them into Google, so you don't have to read anything, you can just look it up on Google. It seems as though there was some sort of, again, massive kind of I don't know if it was if it was an ideology or if it was just an unconscious movement, but essentially to control people's minds, so that people are not free to speak to each other, to think for themselves, to speak freely. It's as though there has been a development going on for quite a while now that is bearing fruit, because people aren't thinking. So I'm always grateful to you, because you and I seem to have the same wavelength, even though we have very different backgrounds. So
yes. But I mean, if you're thinking and there's the world is the same.
yes. I think
if you're paying attention, it's there.
I think so too. It just takes paying attention. So thank you, Diana, for speaking to me today. And I look forward to talking to you again.
I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Me too. And please keep doing your work as well, please.
Thank you.